Thank you, Malin. I don't know what to do always. I try to do things even if I don't know what to do, and that's what I want to talk about. And I am also a regular at the ClimateExistence conference, and this time I've been so sort of comfortable and detached and not very emotionally involved, which is otherwise something, those of you who know me, you know that I tend to get very emotional. And I haven't been until this very dry research presentation that Isak and Johan and Christopher gave. Very interesting. So, you know, life is always unexpected, even at conferences. And I want to actually, it's really a privilege to be here and to speak. A lot of what I'm doing and what I will talk about has been, is rooted at Sigtuna Stiftelsen in very exciting ways. So, and I also feel that I really want to build on what Mikael Kurkiala and Isabella Lövin started us off with concerning responsibility and narrative. And the way, Mikael, you spoke about responsibility in a moral and a legal way. And Isabella also spoke about how our societies isn't supporting our ability to respond in the way that they should. And I hope that what I want to talk to you about is kind of bridging both of those things. And also how I think that we have to be a bit skilled or sneaky in how we build on what Dugald called the mother tree, the nutrients of the mother tree, the nutrients of the energy of the old system in building something new. So that's what I want to talk about. And I don't know if you know these birds. They are from a film called Rio. And they are the last of the Spixis macaws in the world. And one of them, Blue, he's flying from, I think from London. He's flying because he learns that there is a female jewel in Brazil. So he's flying there to meet her. But actually it would be better if he had gone to the conference of the birds that we also attended 2 days ago. It seems like a month ago, but it's actually 2 days ago that we were at the conference of the birds, and we flew across all of those valleys. Because if he had flown, for real, he would have been too late. Because there are no Spixis macaws left in the wild. And yesterday we heard a lot about death. And I think that this time that we are living in is sort of the bigger death. If Stephen spoke about death as part of life, what we are living through now is death as discontinuation of life, a death where the life is no longer possible in a certain direction. That's not the case yet, possibly, for the Spixis macaw, because there are still Spixis macaws left in the world. They are, however, all of them in captivity, and their forest is gone, so we don't know. I want to also take you to these huge empty halls of a big conference building in Montreal, where last year the COP15 was held of the Convention of Biological Diversity, which is sort of where the world meet to see how can we manage life on Earth. And it's really interesting. We have done so many things together these days. So yesterday we buried the climate goals. I suppose it was the climate goals of the UN Climate Convention. And we could also, next year or next conference, maybe we could bury the goals of the Biodiversity Convention, because when the world met in December last year in Montreal, it was with the knowledge that none of the goals of the Biodiversity Convention had been met. So it was time to make a new framework. And one of the first meetings I had in Montreal was with a stonemason, Sebastian, and I want us to listen to him for 2 minutes. And it's a very bad sound because this is just with my mobile phone, but you will take it as a sort of an ambience that we are in this big hall and there are a lot of meetings and people talking and everything. And it's my bad texting also.
I'll tell the tale that I told you before.
Yeah, do. You know
I'm
the
a stonemason. I didn't know anything about biodiversity until I was commissioned to carve the image of a recently extinct species, Spix's macaw. I did my homework for my job, for my carving job. 9 chapters about Spix's macaw, 2 chapters about the global picture. And in those 2 chapters, Tony Juniper, who was the author of the book, is telling me there's a mass extinction event like when the dinosaurs went down. And I'm thinking, what? That is so huge. And I didn't know which was more shocking, that this was happening or that I didn't know. And somewhere in here, you know, it's just the biggest subject of all, it seems to me. It's the longest, it has the longest pedigree, if you like. Evolution's been going on for whatever it is, 3.5 billion years. And our actions, this will be the longest lasting. Our effect on biodiversity will be the longest lasting when everything else has turned to dust. Our impact, that's not my observation, that's Elizabeth Kolbe. But the thing is, it's such a big subject, and we have to find ways of presenting it so it seems so. That's the thing, and a lot of the problem with this is, everyone knows this stuff, I'm sure, but it's simple. Environmental stuff is, you know, by the time it seems important, it'll be a little bit too late to do much about it. That's the trouble. And so there have to be cultural projects, there have to be imaginative stuff to bridge that gap. And this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to write it in stone. We're trying to do any kind of cultural stuff that renders it vivid or illuminating or whatever. And our art form, this is the one thing I'll say. So, you know, I'm a dinosaur, I'm a stonemason, but our art form is the art form of civilization. It's almost like the archetype, the mythical art form of civilization. It's architecture, stonemason. So that's kind of why it's kind of part of what we're trying to do. This is a symbolic kind of civilizational act.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I hope you really beheld his mimic and everything. So what he's doing is to build an underground cathedral depicting evolution and where we are now, and writing it in stone, as he said. And it's an extension of the Eden project in south of England, so it will be in Portland of south of England. Yeah, so then what is our responsibility, really? That's something I have been pondering for the last decade or more than that. And I think that we can, it's really not enough to witness. It's not enough to have our critical discourses and analyze the problem and describe and understand the problem. We have to also make proposals. Living at the end of the world is also to live in the beginning of the world, and then in the beginning of what? And I think that's vastly, vastly more difficult, because anything you propose will not be reasonable from the old system. So you will be ignored, you will be criticized, you will be unbelievable, unreasonable. And Rachel Carson, of course, has said something about that. Instead of always trying to impose our will on nature, we should sometimes be quiet and listen to what she has to tell us. The stream of time moves forward and mankind moves with it. Your generation, she's speaking to her students here, your generation must come to terms with the environment. You must face realities instead of taking refuge in ignorance and evasion of truth. Yours is a grave and sobering responsibility, but it's also a shining opportunity. You go out into a world where mankind is challenged, as it has never been challenged before, to prove its maturity and its mastery, not of nature, but of itself. So, and therein lies our hope and our destiny. So, how do we govern ourselves in relationship with the living whole that we know we are a part of? That's something that I have been thinking a lot about, because we have this mastery over nature isn't any idea. It's a foundational idea in the society that we find ourselves in. The assumption that humans are at the top of a hierarchy, or even totally separate from the rest of life, is an idea that is embedded in hundreds and hundreds of years of development of the institutions that we live in. So this is Aristotle's model of the world, where humans are at the top of the pyramid. Or no, really men. Men, yeah. Women are more close to the whales. And then comes the mammals, and then the birds, and the amphibians, and fish, and invertebrates, and bacteria. And then we have the plants, the mother trees. They are in a little corner down there. And actually, so in the cradle of Western civilization, these ideas are starting to become very dominant. And since then, the legitimizing voices of our society, where we went to understand what was true and right in the world. So from the beginning, the Christian church, and I know that there are many ways of thinking about the world from a Christian perspective, but I think that the idea that God created man in his image, and that humans are the only beings with a soul, that has sort of been the dominant interpretation. And then in the Enlightenment, that gradually shifted, and instead now we go to science when we want to know what the world looks like. And science is saying that humans are the reasonable beings, we are the ones who can think, and that is what makes us, what did he say, Descartes? That is what makes us beings, even, subjects, while the rest of the world is objects, just resources for us. And this is what created the machine. This is the machine that we are living in. And it's actually a world-devouring machine in a very physical, a very material sense. And you can understand that in various ways. To me, this is the most tangible way, which is that the machine is turning the complex living biosphere into dead matter, into a complicated technosphere. So there is now more human-made material on the planet than there is living beings living, than the biosphere. The technosphere is larger than the biosphere. There are more plastic in the world than there are animals. How is this possible? And that's so pervasive. I have a friend, and he is an expert on the fauna of whale falls. So you know when a whale dies, it falls down through the ocean. It can be kilometers down, and it lands on the ocean floor. And then there will come animals to eat it. And it can be 1,000 kilometers to the next whale fall in any direction. How do they find those? I don't think we know, but that's what he's thinking about. And he was in the media a lot a few weeks ago because they made this study of the fauna of the deep sea, and they said 90% of what we find is new to science. We didn't know it existed. So that's a measure of how ignorant we are of the other beings of the planet. But how come? How could they make this study? Well, because that it's now funded by companies who want to mine the deep seas. That's why we can get this knowledge, because we can suddenly fund the study because we want to exploit the new frontiers. And Isaac, you quoted Leonard Cohen. Yesterday is my favorite song, one of my favorite songs. I can't run no more with that lawless crowd. It's a lawless crowd because there are laws governing life on Earth. And we have managed, with this flawed assumption, to create laws that are not aligned with the laws of life. And then this is what happens. We will turn life into the machine. And we can't stop ourselves. We don't have a way to stop that process with the laws that we currently live with. There are no breaks. We have to go down into the deep sea. We have to go out in space. There are already plans to mine the moon as well. And that's sort of just the machine doing what it does. So this is indeed a very primitive cosmology. I mean, it's blunt, it's lame, it's unsophisticated, it's too bad. We can't live with that. So then what? And to me, of course, I mean, working with the law, as I find myself doing, is a bit uncomfortable because I'm an ecologist, as Malin said. So I work with the laws of life and not with the laws of society. But sometimes you just have to do what you have to do. Like that is the responsibility. And it's very interesting with law and the dichotomy you made with law and morals, because law is so, there is really a dynamic relationship between our moral ideas and our legal ideas. So what we think is wrong, we tend to have laws against. And when there is this legal term called malum in se, what's bad in itself. That's the moral side of it. And malum prohibitum, what's bad because it's prohibited. And when these things are far apart, we get the problem. So if I ask you, do you think that nature and the living beings, the more than human living beings, do they have a right to exist? Do you think so? You can raise your hand. Yeah, okay, thank you. I mean, children knows that, isn't it? We all know that. Nature has the right to exist. But according to our legal system, it doesn't. nature is rightless. It's in law, we regulate the relationship to nature as property. So our laws regulate relationships between people and their property. It doesn't regulate relationships between people and the more than human beings, because they are not legal subjects, they are objects. And there is a limit to how we can understand. Like when something is not regulated in law, there is a limit to how much we can understand it as being morally wrong. So if something is not malum prohibitum, it can't be malum in se. And that's why changing law is so powerful, because you can view it as a South African lawyer who was the keynote speaker of the our first Earth Rights Conference here in Sigtuna Stiftelsen in 2017. He says law is the DNA of the system. So if you change law, you also change how the system expresses itself, how we collectively behave, because laws are in the basis of that. And because it influences our morals, it also influences even the the values and what's behind below the foundations of the law, our worldviews. Yeah, so that's why it's a powerful place to transform systems, and it's also an existential. It also influences our cosmology. One of the first people to talk about rights of nature is American priest Thomas Berry, and he's talking about this fatal misunderstanding that we have built our culture on, that, and he wants to correct that. We view nature as a collection of objects, but it's not that. It's a communion of subjects. And he's also talking about the natural world as the larger sacred community to which we belong. And when we are alienated from this community, we become destitute in all that makes us human. When we damage this community, we also damage our own existence. So we become less human because of the way that we fail to relate to the natural world. And of course, I'm going to talk more now about rights of nature, and I just want to acknowledge what Maj-Britt Öhman spoke about of the Sami cosmology and the Sami relationship to the more than human world as something obvious. And also, Alf, what you spoke about Irena, that it doesn't matter what indigenous people's cosmology you understand, you study, if it's from Australia or Alaska or the Amazon, they all have this understanding of humans as part of a living whole. And having that embedded in law, so understanding that nature has the right to exist and I am part of a community, and having those rights embedded in law is a very elegant translation of indigenous worldviews into the Western society. So it's a very sneaky way of changing our worldview. And one of the first person, I think, to talk about that was Christopher Stone, professor of law, and he wrote this article in 1972, so more than 50 years ago, Should Trees Have Standing Toward Legal Rights for Natural Objects. And it's very interesting how in the introduction he says that this is unthinkable. The fact is that each time there is a movement to confer rights onto some new entity, the proposal is bound to sound odd or frightening or laughable. This is partly because until the rightless thing receives its rights, we cannot see it as anything but a thing for the use of us, those who are holding rights at the time. So we are sort of, we can be stuck if we don't make a jump of imagination and say, well, but actually we're just stuck in our heads. What if nature has rights? So in that way, I think it's an apocalyptic proposal. I have this thing also, yeah. It's an apocalyptic proposal. It may seem that we are living through the apocalypse, but the apocalypse actually means unveiling. So when you just make a proposal to say, well, actually nature can have rights in law, then you take away the veil, which is that it hasn't that now. It doesn't have that now. We can understand that we're living in this misunderstanding, that we just take for granted, that we're sleepwalking through, as you said in your workshop. And this is also, you also spoke about this thing with rights or obligations. Like, why do we talk about rights? It's actually that we have obligations. We have obligations as members of society. And I think that's not, I mean, those are just mirroring each other. If you don't have rights, if you don't have rights, I don't have any obligations towards you. So rights is sort of, you have to have rights for there to be obligations. And also indigenous peoples, when we come with this thing of rights of nature, they are like, well, what rights? We don't consider rights. That's not the thing. That's not interesting. This is about your duties to the living world. But in our worldview, we cannot have duties because there's no one there to have duties towards. So there has to be rights for there to be obligations. And when I met with this idea, it's more than 10 years ago now, it felt like unthinkable almost, like a utopian proposal. I thought this is so far removed from the sustainability discourse that I was involved in. I can work with this my whole life. I will never see any results of it, but it makes so much sense. So I have to do it anyway. And I started to speak with my friends in the environmental movement, with the lawyers, and they were like, well, yeah, that's kind of remotely interesting, but it's nothing we can work with at all. It's something they do in South America. And then there has been steps on this way. And that's sort of what I want to talk about, how transformational change happens, that you think something, you speak to someone, you do something, and things happen. And Alf, I know you spoke to someone of the meeting we had at the ClimateExistence conference in 2016 in the stairs. And I just grabbed you and I said, well, we want to make this conference on earth rights. And you just immediately got that. It was a very memorable meeting. So we have had 2 Earth Rights conferences and a lot of other events on the theme here at Sigtuna Stiftelsen. And we are not the only ones, but actually this is an exploding field worldwide. I could never, ever have imagined how fast it's going. We're not going to go into detail at all here, but just to show you that this is an exponential development. And I want to go back now to COP 15. Yeah, we had to wear masks. I look bewildered. And at the Earth Rights Conference in this room 4 years ago, in 2019, I had just realized that in 2020 there would be a COP15. Isn't that interesting, by the way? There will be, in the climate convention, there will be the COP28? Yeah. So we have we have meetings in the climate convention every year, but when we are talking about life on Earth, we can do with every second year, for very interesting reasons that I think has to do with who profits on what, actually. But let's not go into that now. So I had understand that there will be a new framework in this biodiversity convention, and that would be the place for rights of nature on a global policy level. And I had no idea at all how to influence global policy. And we had the meeting. There were some, actually some civil servants on the Earth Rights Conference here at Sigtuna in 2019 who were involved with the Biodiversity Convention. So I asked them, and we actually had a very chaotic workshop on the subject. But nothing really happened. But then I started to conspire with another woman from Switzerland who's working on rights of nature, and I asked. We found out that actually all the email addresses of all the focal points of the states. There are 198 states in the Convention on Biodiversity. So almost all states in the world, except some like Somalia and the US. And so I asked my daughter, can you please extract all of those email addresses, because you had to make like 5 clicks for each address, and they were like 1,600. And she did that because she loves life so much. No, but actually because I paid her. But she did that, and we started to communicate with them. And because of the pandemic, the conference was postponed from 2020 to 2022. So we had some time. We partnered with Earth Law Center in the US, and we made briefs, and we had webinars, and we started to communicate. And well, actually, there's something more I have to point out before we get to results, which is this, which is also so interesting when it comes to how we govern our relationship with life. I think it was Japan when they were negotiating in Montreal. So the COP15 meeting was in Montreal in December. And Japan said, we want to have this addition. This is a framework for all, for the whole of government and the whole of society. Its success requires political will and recognition at the highest level of government, and relies on action and cooperation by all levels of government and by all actors of society, while recognizing that this framework is not legally binding. And I was like, well, yeah, everyone sitting in this room knows that. Those conventions are not legally binding, but still they wanted to spell it out. It is not in the final text, but I found it so interesting. What is in the final text, though, is actually rights of nature and rights of Mother Earth. And this is the first time in international policy that rights of nature gets in there. So it's in a section on different value systems. And it says the framework recognizes and considers these diverse value systems and concepts, including, for those countries that recognize them, rights of nature and rights of Mother Earth as being an integral part of its successful implementation. And what I find very, very interesting is that, of course, this is just a line in a non-legally binding document in a convention. So what does it really mean in practice? And you never know, as I said, you never know. You do something and then something happens and other people come along and, you know, things start to materialize in different ways. And I found it so powerful what Stephen said last night about fate. Fate is that which is said out loud. So the moment you say something, you're also creating fate. And last week, or 10 days ago, I got this invitation from the UN to an experts consultation on rights of nature. And this is the UN Development Program, the UN Environment Program, and the IUCN, which is the world's greatest conservation organization. And they mention the reason that they are making this invitation is that rights of nature got into the biodiversity framework. So they were like, whoa, what's this? What is it really? What can we do with it? We have to discuss this. And that's the way it goes. What about that, Alf? It was born here in this room. Yeah. I find it very, very fascinating and encouraging that even there's not the linear relationship between the dimension of change and how difficult it is to achieve. So that's why you have to actually spell out, propose really audacious things and keep working on them, even if seemingly it will not. It's impossible, because suddenly it's possible. And that's like it's an experience I have, that this field is now ready for things to really move very fast. And we can be hopeless, and I'm often hopeless, but when you see how fast some things are moving, it becomes very clear that we have no idea what we can achieve actually. So I wanted to take the opportunity to just present some other dreams that I have. And the first one we started to discuss yesterday. I mean, because of the magic, the apparent magic of these rooms, we have to utilize that. So we did that yesterday in our workshop, and we spoke about an embassy of the Baltic Sea. I live on an island in the Baltic Sea, so I have seen what's happening, how it's dying very rapidly, and it's not being represented in the rooms where decisions affecting its well-being are being taken. But we can change that. We can have an embassy of the Baltic Sea, an institution speaking for the sea and its well-being. And so that's what I will report back in 4 years, how the embassy is developing. Yeah, I think I'll end there. I'll end with Ursula K. Le Guin, Master of Imagination, and her perhaps, she doesn't really know, but perhaps what I'm trying to do is to subjectify the world, because look at where objectifying it has gotten us. So how do we meet with the world? How do we fall in love with the world and its beings? And that's such a beautiful and exciting adventure. So, I mean, let's perhaps keep doing that together in our various ways. Thank you so much. The embassy.
Thank you, Pella. That really was a nice feeling of going somewhere, getting somewhere. And you said 4 years, but maybe 2 even.
Yeah, from experience. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So
well, yeah. I think people get tired of listening to me all the time, you know.
We wouldn't be here if we were.
No. Well, we don't know. I know that there are there are conspiracies being held here. But don't worry, you don't have to do anything. You can have
Thank
cake.
God. It's like, what's happening? Well, thank you very much, Pella. This was amazing. A really good start of our where we are in one place today from 11. Look, my head is all scrambled eggs, I feel. But it's been a really good start to the ending of this conference. And I think we have some time for questions or comments. And after that, I'm going to give also the last couple of minutes to Juni, who has the exhibition with the photography.
Yeah,
But first, questions, comments. I can pass the microphone along.
Juni, look, she's on the other side of the Baltic, so she will be conspirating as well, conspiring. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Pella, for a very inspiring speech. I am a little bit thinking about what objections will come from the outside world to this, and in particular maybe from politicians and the lawyers, not to forget. And I'm thinking there, first of all, maybe one has to remember maybe that if you create rights for nature, it's not that it's the same rights or identical rights as the rights created for humans at the time of Enlightenment, of the French Revolution, and Declaration of Human Rights, and so on.
Yeah, we can assume that the Purge is not very interested in the right to education, for example.
No, exactly. It's not individual rights, because you cannot give individual rights to all organisms in a forest, right? So it must be some other kind of right. No, I think that's one thing. And the other thing on objection, I guess, is that people will ask, and so, okay, right, you have the rights of nature, but who will speak? Who will have the right to speak for nature?
Yeah.
Right? Because at the end of the day, the concept of right is human-made. In itself.
Yeah.
So this means, in a way, that we're not talking about indeed individual rights to nature, but we're talking about, I think, redressing the balance of power between the rights of humans, and in particular the right of property, which is recognized, and then the rights of nature against, in particular, then the rights of property. So it's a kind of, to recognize this as a redressing the balance, rather than giving sort of the right for a single bacterium to go to court, right? Because that's not what we want.
Thank you so much. I could hold a whole lecture on just those questions. Thank you for the questions. I'm very happy that I said in the beginning that as soon as you propose something that's in another paradigm, you will have so much objections. We start to think how it's not possible. And I have sort of cultivated the skill to think about what's possible instead. And also what Rachel Carson said about how do we now master ourselves instead of nature. So, of course, this is a human game. It's nothing else. Rights, we don't find any rights out there. It's just an idea that we have to govern ourselves instead of trying to govern all the others. And you are very right that the idea of representation is a core one. And today, in practice, we are giving a lot of power, because it's in the law. We are giving a lot of power to property and to corporations, because corporations are rights holders and they are often very powerful. So of course they eat the living world, which is rightless and thus doesn't have any power. So that's already a huge thing. All of this is a huge thing. And then in detail, how it will play out, we don't know, because it's a huge change. So it's an emergent space, and we're just taking the first baby steps. And just with the embassy, who will be an ambassador? On what grounds will it speak on behalf of the Baltic? And I think we are not at all we don't start from zero, because we have decades and decades of research on the health of the Baltic. So we can just ask science, what do we know? What do you think the Baltic wants? And they have already said that for decades, but we haven't been acting in accordance with it because it's not important. And there are different models. So in Ecuador, for example, which is actually the first and still only country to have its rights of nature in the constitution, anyone can speak for nature. In many other contexts, it's some elected representative with a certain potential to voice the needs of an ecosystem. And I think that we have this great Swedish invention with ombudsman. We have an ombudsman for children, for example. They have a limited ability to speak for their rights. So you have not just a person, but a whole office of lawyers speaking for the rights of the children. And you can think about just the practical change that would mean for nature. Today, people speaking for nature are, I think I even know them, the lawyers who speak for nature today. They are like less than 5 in Sweden. So if society would say, actually, we have to have an office of people who are employed to voice the needs for nature, that would be a huge change. Already that simple thing that we already have.
We have time for one more very brief question.
Because those were
Really,
so good.
First.
Wow, Pella, thank you. I was thinking about the difference between so-called natural law and the law of nature. Like, natural law is a construction, is used even in the church. We follow after natural law, constructed from different perspectives, and then which is reified. So, if we start where you started, successfully so, with the steps, I thought the Nuremberg laws took 1 year to make legal everything that Hitler did. 1 year. So, it was 1 year, which means we can achieve what we need to achieve.
Yeah.
And to the question you said, now they are representatives like in Ecuador. Well, the first thought I had is indigenous peoples.
Yeah.
They are entitled because they have been the best guardians so far of the rights of nature. So there you have potential, could be Sapki or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I should have made that more clear. Actually, indigenous people are informing this whole movement, and they are in many cases also leading it. So it's not a coincidence that Ecuador has been a leader, New Zealand has been a leader, Colombia also. So yeah, definitely indigenous people. This is as I said, it's a really powerful marriage between indigenous cosmovisions and the Western legal system. As flawed as it is, it has a lot of power in it. So I believe we can utilize that power to take a huge step.